So I think fundamentally what we do at Own Academy is believing that today's teachers should be employers. So we turn employers into educators and we turn educators into facilitators and we create the infrastructure that makes that happen.
Hello everyone, thank you so much for watching and listening. Right now we have a special guest, but before we introduce her, we do want to talk about where we're at.
This weekend we're at 21st Century Learning in Bangkok. We're at the Verso School, which is non-traditional school setup.
Yep.
They're really focused on problem-based learning and also multi-age learning and giving kids a little bit more autonomy in what they learn and how they learn it.
Yeah, and I think they're famous because they designed the school like from scratch, and they brought in IDEO. And they helped through design thinking, systems thinking to create the school. So really cool. And I was blessed enough to be at a presentation with Natalie. Natalie, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi gentlemen, thank you so much for inviting me to be your guest. I'm just so honored to be here. So my name is Natalie, I'm from Hong Kong, and I founded Own Academy in 2016 because I wanted to solve my own personal problem of never knowing what I wanted to become, because I was very much told by my mom that you cannot be an artist. When I said that to her when I was young, and then I just kind of lost my sense of self afterwards. So I started Own Academy because I want to empower ownership within each and every young person to take charge of your life and to know that the moment that you do, then things kind of magically happen for you afterwards.
Listening to your presentation, there was a great connection with the name of our podcast, what our podcast is about. Iceberg meaning we want to be a disruptor to traditional education. What you're going to talk about, your academy, very much does that. And the whole mountain part is we are passionate about the process, the journey to a mountain, a big goal. Whole idea of finding your purpose through that journey.
Yeah, so I think I used to say that I want to disrupt education, but I realized that the word disrupt is a very disruptive word.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people don't sit very well with it, especially when we talk about a dinosaur. So nobody wants to be disrupted. So I think I actually stopped using the word disruption and actually use the word I want to re-engineer education. Because I think re-engineering means that all the pieces are actually there. I'm not actually inventing anything new. I'm just trying to reconstruct educational experience and make that a new norm.
That kind of speaks to your background with engineering. Do you want to kind of talk about that journey of where you used to be and how you got to Academy?
My mom said you cannot be an artist. I was just kind of like, okay, so what can I be? And you only have 4 options. You have a doctor, banker, lawyer, and engineer. And I think engineer just seemed to be the most interesting out of all the really bad options out there. And then I went and applied for engineering and ended up getting in. And surprisingly, I actually really loved my engineering. I studied industrial and systems engineering, which is all about optimization of systems and how do you make things better. And so I really love that philosophy about how do you make things better. So I think that's where I apply a lot of that into how I'm re-engineering education, because I just think that there's a lot of amazing pieces there. There's a lot of not so good pieces there, but how do you really streamline and optimize, and how do you actually create a value chain across all stakeholders?
Or what was the watershed moment where you went, okay, this engineering game has been great to me, but I kind of want to go in a different direction? What did that moment look like for you?
Yeah, so I would say there was a lot of series of moments, many moments, and then it's always in hindsight that you're like, oh, okay, that's what it's telling me, and that's what it's guiding me. So after engineering, I actually didn't go and become an engineer. I worked in the corporate world, so I was in Deloitte. I actually started as an IT auditor that I thought was IT consulting, and then I went into it. I was like, okay, this is nothing like what I imagined. And then I realized that I'm not an IT person. Till today, I still can't really differentiate between a router or a Wi-Fi modem or anything like that. And I realized I'm much more of a human person. And so I transitioned to human capital consulting, which is a lot about every business has 3 main components, right? There's a human side, there's a money side, and there's a tech side. Yeah. And I realized that I'm not the tech side, I'm much more of the human side. So how do you really realize that by incentivizing humans to do the best work, that's when the company becomes the best? So I think having done really cool projects when I was at Deloitte, I was sometimes you dream about being a consultant and you fly around the US and you go to big companies and you solve problems, and that was cool for maybe 4 weeks. And then afterwards you're like, is this what life is? Like, is this what it is? Because I think growing up, I've always wanted to help bridge the gap between the rich and the poor. And just being in corporate, I feel like I'm just helping rich people get richer. And it just doesn't really kind of like hit sort of this purpose in me. And I just was really started getting very depressed. I was like, calling in sick days at work. And so I just kind of like start looking at what can I do? If I'm solving big corporate problems, what other problem can I solve? And when I look at the kind of like general scope of issues, everything kind of goes back to education. Education is the root cause for all the problems that you see in the world. And I was like, I want to fix that. So that's kind of where I realized that, having had some of the best education that my parents can afford, it did not help me be prepared for the world. It did not help me know where my guidance and everything is. And I just feel like I wanted to help young people figure that out. So I was like, okay, I'm going to go into education world. I want to somehow build the future of education. And I was like, okay, maybe I need to start from the bottom, because I think nobody's going to hear this 25-year-old girl saying that I'm going to build a future of education. Nobody's going to trust me. I need to build my credentials. I need to build my credibility. And so I decided to work for a very progressive school in Hong Kong. And I want to understand, what does a progressive school mean? Like, how do they execute? How do they operationalize? And then from there, I got to learn what does it mean to be a teacher, because I want to understand the pain points of a teacher, because I think that's like change agent, right? The teachers are such a powerful kind of resource for young people. And then from there, that's when I was like, okay, I felt like my teaching probably needs a little bit more boost. So I did my master's of education. So I studied I studied designing powerful learning environments, which is all about the science of learning. So how do we help motivate? Because ultimately it comes down to motivation. Where does the motivation come from? And the motivation, I definitely did not have motivation growing up. I was so like blasé. It was like, whatever, like just give it to me. Like, I'll just do whatever. I was just constantly just so not interested. And I think that's where I wanted to help young people kind of unlock that. But you cannot unlock that unless you know what other things you can be interested in. Right. So that's kind of how everything sort of evolved into it. And then similar to what I envision what education looks like, which is very much you can expose students to beyond the academic world, having like really inspiring people to teach, whether you're a teacher, whether you're a professional, just has to be passionate. And then be able to teach things that are relevant, that you see every day in our lives. Not teach things that I cannot connect into the real world. And that was sort of the foundation of how Own Academy started. So I think fundamentally what we do at Own Academy is believing that today's teachers should be employers. So we turn employers into educators, and we turn educators into facilitators, and we create the infrastructure that makes that happen. Because I think that employers are the ones that are, working in the modern world, and they have all these latest trends and that's what young people need to know about. Rather than like in school, we kind of teach history, like historical context of everything, but we don't teach them about the future. And so that's what Own Academy wants to focus on, the future, and be able to bring that to some young people, and then teach what young people needs to know when they need to know. Right. Because I think that like the educational journey is a little bit disconnected, where I think foundational knowledge is very important in primary years, but when you're in middle years, where you're making some of the most important decisions in your life, and you really have no data point about like what discipline you want to go into, what major you want to go into, like I actually think that that's where the real world needs to be presented to the students, and have them experience many different kind of careers, many different kind of like projections, so they can understand that, okay, I actually love being like a film producer. Then that's how they can maybe choose more the creative path. Whereas like now they have not enough of that. And I think also in the Asian context, it's Asian families, having my own family as well, it's like they need to see proof that you're good at something in order for them to trust that you can do it. Right. You cannot just say that I kind of want to do that. Like that doesn't work for them. You kind of need to prove. So that's kind of where, for us, we create a lot of what we call career samplers in different formats to help bring into school time, to basically have professionals develop curriculums that are like 1 to 5 days, or even like case study challenges that are designed with companies that are mapped to the curriculum for teachers to actually use those inside the classroom. Because having done research with teachers, a lot of them do want to teach more real world content, but there's no resource for that. There's just a lot of like kind of theoretical content. Correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm just kind of like trying to understand a little bit more about that pain point.
There's a huge need, I think, for teachers to understand what's happening in the real world. And the idea that your academy basically partners up the educator and the professional to co-create an experience, I think that is pretty innovative. So if we can dive a little deeper into the actual learning, you talked about some type of narrative format. Can you discuss that?
Yeah, so I believe that a lot of what we learn in the world, it's best described if you were to tell it in story formats, in like storytelling formats, because you are captivated by stories. And I think that every topic, every kind of module can be done in storytelling. So we actually follow this format called the narrative intelligence, context, problem, solution. So that's kind of how we structure all our experiences, whether it's a 5-day experiences, whether it's a 1-day experience, like everything has a context, problem, solution. Because I think it's important for students to first of all understand the context. I think a lot of times what we teach in school is very out of context. It's like, when do we need to ever use this, right? So let's teach the context first, and then show the problem that happens in the context, and then show the solution. So of course, a lot of solutions are not always like a black and white solution.
Yeah.
But I think what we're trying to show is like what has been done as like kind of a benchmark, or as like a sort of like what a professional would have done. So then the idea is that when teachers uses this type of experience or this kind of context, they can see like if students were to create their own solution, how does that fare with a professional solution? And actually see the gap in like the thinking or the gap in like the execution. So that's kind of where we want to really focus on context, problem, solution, but to also incorporate like core competencies within it. And these core competencies has to be the ones that are recognized by employers, because employers today, because we do a lot of we sit between the employer world and the educator world. So we work with a lot of employers, and they most say that these students are coming from top universities, are great. They can do so much academic knowledge, but they have no idea what to do when they come to the workplace, because it requires them to really have a different way of thinking, not just critical problem solving, but just to be able to understand how to absorb information that way, right? So I think that's why we want to make sure that our core competencies are vetted by professionals, so then we can embed those within all our context, problem, solution. Honestly, a lot of it is really soft skills based. So we develop our own called an Own It framework. So O stands for open-mindedness, W means work ethics, N is your network ability, and then I is your innovative, creative thinking, and then T is kind of your teamwork and empathy. So these are things that I know as employers, if they know that someone has all these highly checked off, then they can be placed into any sort of workplace, and anybody would love to work with them. And so that's where we want kind of what we do to be a lot about developing the purpose of young people by meeting really inspiring people that are doing impact-driven work, and then to be able to realize that, I cannot talk like that, or I cannot behave like that. There's just so many nuances that is actually not expressed in the day-to-day. It's not explicit. A lot of these are implicit things that needs to be observed over time. I think time is a very big factor in this development journey.
I was going to say, in terms of company, an organisation gets bigger and you're impacting other educational spaces, in terms of scaling and involving more professionals, do you have sort of a plan or ideas around how that will scale over time?
Yeah, that's been my problem to solve in the past 7 years of my own academy life. So our biggest initiative going forward actually is something called the Own Degree. So we actually want to launch a new degree structure that is all about empowering the ownership from within the learner and having them be empowered. But then it's actually accredited not by an education institution, but by employers. We truly want to decentralize how accreditation comes about and be able to help the young person kind of be able to explore different things and know that actually everything kind of connects for you at the end of it. There's nothing that you learn is not connected. I think the biggest problem that I see in current education system, there's no space for failure. Everything is graded, everything needs to be measured, and that's not real life. Real life has so much ups and downs, so we want to really be a complementary degree to the academic degree and make this to be what we call the first real-world experience degree that is helping young people develop that purpose by creating a comfortable, safe space for them to just try and make mistakes. We want them to make mistakes because you don't make mistakes, you would never learn. And I think that's kind of where we want to create this into kind of a new standard, a new structure, where employers will validate these structures and be able to say, I will fast track anybody who has an own degree into a final round interview for internship or final round interview for employment. So we want to create a whole new kind of a competency measurement that does that. And the way to do it is by saying that everybody that works within the own degree, whether it's someone that gives an internship, someone does a mentorship, they all follow the Own It framework. So then we train everybody on that. And we want to also create like a certification for schools that are certifying them on how they can be more real world centric. Because I know that everybody talks about learner centric, but I think we need to also be real world centric to really make the learning more applicable. So we really want own degree to be something that in the future everybody has a dual degree system, that they graduate from university and also from own academy with their own degree. And that the own degree will actually give you that kind of like fast track ability into employment.
We just want to say thank you very much, Natalie, for taking this time, because it really is inspiring to hear a really different approach to these high school years and getting kids involved in a really purposeful way. And yeah, thank you for being on the Iceberg Mountain podcast. It's our first guest speaker, which is an awesome day. Yeah.
Thank you, gentlemen, for having me on. I honestly love talking about how we can really create change from within. And I think it takes like educators from inside the system versus me outside the system to try to collaborate and really create that synergy together. So thank you for having me on this podcast.
You're welcome. It's our pleasure. So until next time, be the iceberg.
And climb the mountain.